Welcome, 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 everyone, to this extra special, accidentally equinoctial live stream with the one and only Rhyd Wildermuth on the occasion of the launch/release of his latest book, Here Be Monsters. Rhyd, welcome back.
Hello.
Nice one. So how are you feeling? Question one, now that it's out in the world. The week before, I typically feel this is the worst book anyone's ever seen or written. And then the week of, I'm like, no, this is okay. But it's still in those early newborn evenings. So how are you feeling now it's out in the world now? Where are you at?
Yeah, I feel fantastic. So I like the week before, or the few weeks before, I was like, wait, this is a really amazing book, but no one's going to like it. So, well, fuck it,
Fair enough.
And then, because it's not out, like only a few people got it because of pre-orders or whatever. And, I had my reading in London, the first one on Friday night. And that was really fantastic. We filled up, it was kind of a small room, but we filled it up, and it was really good. I was really happy. So I feel a lot more positive.
As someone who's had a book launch in London and isn't from there, whatever we might say about the place, it's a feather in the cap. It's definitely a feather in the cap for us hayseeds that from
So my husband was calculating the population size difference between London and this tiny little village, and it's something like 370,000 times bigger. So nice. Yeah, I guess it's like that. It was kind of a big thing to do it in London. I was pretty happy. And London's neat. It's really loud though. And then the metro system where everything is now moneyless. Well, not moneyless, but like physical less, and you just swipe a card, and it was good to go back to my village. So.
There you go. Yes, the loudness. One of the things I got hooked on, which I can't unhook myself from, is sleeping with earplugs, because I lived under the Heathrow flight path. And now I can't. I live where there is no sound, and I can't sleep without them anyway. So, but I know, yeah, that's all good. I'm glad the book is called Here Be Monsters, because we were just chatting prior to going live. It was a piece you wrote by the same name that got us talking again a couple of years ago now. And
indeed, yeah.
Yeah, and because that piece is excellent, and I guess I want to start with. We started talking about this beforehand. Like, why did you write this book, and what do you want it to do?
So I'll say I actually got around to writing the book because they asked me to. I would say like, oh yeah, I wanted to write it for this reason. It's like, no, actually, I didn't want to write it. I mean, I did. Of course, it needed to be written, but like, unless until they asked me to write it, I don't think I ever would have written it. I'd still have it in my head. And actually, it was that same essay that Carl Neville at Repeater Books had read. It was like, hey, I think maybe you're the right person to write this. I'm like, oh, okay, this is pretty wild. And so, yeah, I mean, the book needed to be written. Someone needed to push me to write it. And then I wrote it, and that was 2 years of hell, which, that's what a book is, right? And then another half a year of hell waiting for it to come out, and then it's out, and then you start asking, okay, so what? I guess I'm writing another one, right? So your question of like, why did I write it? I mean, that's exactly why it was written. But why did I agree to write it? Why did I just decide that I would go through all of that pain for the 2.5 years? Was part of it was to make sense of what the fuck has happened to everything in the last like 20 years, particularly in the last 10. Like, why did leftism go so identitarian? Why was it as I described it in an essay, and then also I spoke about this in the reading itself too. A lot of us were we were leftists. Everyone knew we were leftists. We knew we were leftists, whatever that means, And then suddenly you realize that, the map has been redrawn and you haven't moved. but other people have decided, no, actually, now you're a fascist. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
No, I was with you marching to, like, stop fascists from speaking, and wait, no, I'm suddenly on the other side. What happened? And so that's kind of the shadow throughout the entire book, that I think, all of the early responses to the book have been people saying the same thing, that, yeah, everything changed underneath me. I didn't move, but something happened, and I've been trying to make sense of it. Thank you for trying to make sense of this,
Yeah. In the intervening time, I was thinking about this, putting the questions together. In the intervening time between, I guess, finishing the book and now, I almost had a question which was, not so much is it even relevant anymore, but have we moved past shrill cancellation mobs? And then the Russell Brand thing happened the other day. But I like, the question stands in its own way, which is,
actually, can I? The Russell Brand thing was pretty wild, but actually, there's a better example of how this hasn't changed at all, which was, did you see the people really angry about that Onion article with Zelensky? Yeah, that right there, I think, is exactly the best example of how nothing has changed. Where,
I don't know. I think it's worse. I think this is like I think we're in cancellation 2.0, right? This is why I think Russell Brand's a good example, because he's tactically, if you're going to cancel someone to throw a spanner in the works of the growing opposition to centrist fascism, frankly, he's a perfect, like, it's very well targeted, because he talks to Whitney Webb, and he talks to Tucker Carlson, and he talks to Jimmy Dore. Like, it's the dreaded red-brown alliance, right? But
right,
to make like a public spectacle of his removal and British government threats to the platforms he's on and so on has a chilling effect on those connections. And so it's, when you wrote the book, or even beforehand, cancellation, let's say 2020 to now, in like 2018 to 2021, was a bewildering, toddler shrieking, logic-free mob of like policing submission, and it has that level of idiocy to it, and that's still there. Like, if I look at the comments on the Russell Brand thing, some of which genuinely appear to be like Channel 4 shills, so yay for me and my tiny channel. I think it's metastasized. I think this is one of the reasons I'm sitting with what's good about this book, is to provide a longer story for the fact that, I mean, we had the opportunity, I think, to breathe like a sigh of, perhaps the discourse has in aggregate grown up slightly over the last few years, and realized that we can't keep going on these purity mob witch burnings. And to some extent that's true, but I don't know. Like, it seems metastasized. What do you think's changed in that behavior is maybe how I want to do that question. Or what do you think to that read that Russell Brand represents, like a professionalization of this mob behavior?
Yeah, so there are two things here. The first one is a bit of a divergence, and I don't want to go into too much of it, because there's been some controversy about my book coming out from this publisher. This publisher was started basically from the legacy of Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher had a pretty profound effect, at least in the UK, of kind of stopping the early attempts to cancel Russell Brand because of his essay, The Vampire's Castle.
Yeah.
And now, Mark Fisher is dead. And it's been years, and immediately there was an attempt to say, actually, there's been some interesting disavowals that, Mark Fisher didn't really mean The Vampire's Castle, or that was an essay he was suffering a bipolar manic episode or whatever. He didn't really mean it, and actually, so there's been that, but on a larger thing, and I mentioned this in the book on the subject of anarchism and Antifa or Antifa, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Funny thing, apparently, if you mispronounce it, then that means you're actually a fascist, according to one recent book that came out from a different publisher in London. But I remember, this is about 2017, there was a very concerted effort to demand media corporations, social media corporations specifically, to deplatform people that, the angry mob saw as alt-right or fascist or whatever. Now, in some cases, the people that they were trying to get deplatformed were, pretty awful. But it was a strange moment where a left that had been generally, or at least historically, anti-corporate. That was always one of the things that you thought of as the left. It's like, yeah, they don't like corporations. They were suddenly demanding and trying to organize these crusades to get corporations to get rid of the people that they didn't like. And there was a moment where this backfired spectacularly with Patreon, where anarchists in the United States, CrimethInc, and It's Going Down, two kind of news websites and aggregators, had been really demanding, like, get rid of, and I don't remember the groups that they were trying to get rid of. But Patreon said, okay, we'll get rid of you guys and them. And so, but at the same time, and I remember it's like, oh no, I saw this coming. I told you guys this was coming. In fact, one of my cancellations was because I said, you don't know what you're doing. You should stop doing this. Don't beg the corporations. Don't beg the state to do this work for you. And to even say that suddenly became a fascist position because, I was supporting the bad speech or whatever. But I think around that time, that was the beginning of this coalescence where people forgot that the capitalists also have power, and they're never going to be on your side, even if they do something bad to the people you don't like. And now we have, 5-6 years after that, everybody applauding. Well, not everybody, but many people applauding, like YouTube demonetizing Russell Brand. When the Gray Zones GoFundMe was seized, they were applauding that too. And a lot of these people were, what you could call the social justice identitarian pseudo left. I prefer to go
shitlib woman.
Yeah, I like. I think it's either Adolf Reed or Walter Ben Michaels who just calls them the neoliberal left.
Exactly.
They're the left wing of neoliberalism. They're not the left wing of anti-capitalism. They're fully neoliberal. Yeah. But there's a celebration of like this power to get rid of who they want, while all at the same time they're handing all of this power to the capitalists and begging them. Literally begging them to take this power to get rid of their enemies, and then and then they go for the other leftists too. Well, that's unfortunate, but at least Russell Brand can't make some money.
Yeah, I don't know how popular it's been. Like I've been sitting with those last few days of it, and this is where I think it's jumped up to a 2.0 version of this thing. And it's in that same episode, I quote from Glenn Greenwald saying that there's really just establishment and anti-establishment now as the defining characteristic. And that's always been kind of my position. You have to know where you are in the cycle. I think a pro-union position in the mid-20th century when corruption wasn't total made perfect sense. It doesn't now, not because the core message behind it is wrong. It's that it's not the way what seems like the method of transformation has been co-opted, and that's the part that I think we're in the 2.0 of, because if I play out what happened, it'll be Jimmy Dore next, and if I play out how that happens, it's not just the so-called platforms, it is the payment providers, right? So
Right.
it's now a game of whack-a-mole, and it's all well and good. And I'm hooray for Rumble for saying like, go fuck yourself. We're not going to remove Russell Brand from the platform. Well, that's well and good, except that this power now comes for the pipes. It comes for the pipes that run Rumble, including its payment providers. So I think
Right.
this is why I think that it's all well and good. It's just redrawing the boundaries, or making the redrawn boundaries more explicit that it's establishment, anti-establishment now. Because I don't think it went as well as they wanted it to. If anything, he's more popular, and more people are talking about him than before, which always happens when you do this. But it's like it's like jumping it up to a 2.0 and twisting the battlefield, or the means of engagement once again. And this is in advance of next year's CBDC and whatever, but like we're basically there yet, which is kind of bringing it back to the book, is providing a longer context for, I hate saying something like picking sides, but providing a longer context for the topography of engagement that we're currently in.
Yeah, I think very often. So I start the book in the introduction with two Ursula K. Le Guin quotes, and the one I really focus on, that's kind of the theme throughout the book, is the part of like, we'll need writers who remember what freedom was, and then the point of being realists of a larger reality, and that there, I think, I mean, there's somebody said like, wow, your book is incredibly sympathetic. Like, you are, really kind about this stuff. And it's like, I try to be, because honestly, like, people coming into all of this, into radical ideas or whatever, just now, or I guess 5 years ago or whatever, they're learning about these things from TikTok and Tumblr, which are not really very profound places to find information. And you're not going to see any discussion really of class or the way that class works within capitalism. Instead, you're going to learn very quickly how to identify all of the identity hierarchies, and then how to, how to identify who is oppressing whom. And so they have very little history of this. And so they don't actually remember, because, many of them weren't even around when you might not have liked a person. You might actually have really hated them, but you would work with them towards a common goal against a common enemy, that being capitalists in the state. And this idea now that someone needs to be 100% perfect, whatever that means, like sinless, as it were. Otherwise, they cannot be worked with. I mean, the left cannot do anything when that idea is constantly there.
And honestly, they've been trying that for a century. That's always been the way of splintering organization. It's been to introduce that kind of stuff, right? And but like, that's true. Obviously, it's true. I'm pretty glass half full about it at the moment. And it's honestly the Russell Brand thing that's made me, like, across the spectrum, people are like, ooh, that's not good. And from a rational perspective of like, listen, he hasn't been charged with anything, due process, et cetera, like actually coming together around, dare I say, the correct position, which is like, he might have done that shit, right? But it's not a cult following falling in behind a charismatic former comedian. It's people coming together, realizing that there is a bigger threat. Like, is it good? Can I glass half full what's going on?
Yeah, maybe. I guess I'm new to my return to social media, and because I took about a year and a half off of it, except for research purposes, which was awful. And I think one of the first things that I saw when I got back onto Twitter was or actually the first things that I saw were all like the kind of repetitions of the same cancellation. And then when I looked around the Russell Brand thing, I saw, yes, I saw those critiques, those people saying, well, yeah, I mean, we're not a courtroom. We're not the judges. Why are we doing this in a public trial? And also, this doesn't help anybody. This doesn't help women at all for us to be doing this. But then also saw all of the justifications for why, you saw this too as well with freedom of speech, but innocent until proven guilty is only for the courtroom. That's not for the rest of us. Just like freedom of speech is only a guarantee from the state, but we can punch people in the mouth as much as we like. Also, corporations can do the same thing because they're not under those things. So I've seen a lot of those arguments, which of course are the very American liberal, the paradox of tolerance idea from what was his last name? I can't remember, but yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So I've seen that reaction as well, but perhaps it's just, who knows? Like, it's just, you open the algorithm, throws some stuff your way, you look at it, and you shut it down really quickly because it's all terrifying.
Yeah.
But I do think we are my book would not have been published by anyone 2 years ago.
True.
Absolutely not.
That's a good point.
And mine is not the only book that has come out even this month that is on this general topic. Freddie Deboer his book was published the week before. Now, while his is not a, we're not talking about the same thing, but we are talking about the same thing. Other books have come out this year as well. This is not, the last time that you saw someone from the left trying to do this was Angela Nagel. And that was years ago.
God, that was like innocent times compared to now, wasn't it?
Well, and of course, and now she's considered a fascist, and and she was from Zero, which was the also like Repeater and Zero are basically the same thing now, and all of that. So it's it's fun being one of the first, but it's a little scary being one of the first. But also, I am not the first, and there are other people all saying the same thing. I do think in the over the next few years, you'll see a lot more openness to, this sounds really condescending, but the adults, this
is what I'm feeling, right? Because I've been back on social media for a couple of months more than you have, and I have found it. I came in with a particular attitude, which I described as post more, care less, because it's all bullshit now, unwinding along with the West, and there's a kind of watching the world burn energy that I like about that, but also it's better. It's objectively better than it was several years ago. I think because people have matured into, they're not more civil, they're more fuck it shit posty, and like, no, it's weird. Like it's I'd also point out, though, at least for Twitter, there was a mass migration. I think right around the time that it became X. There have been several waves. Everyone trying to go like, "Oh, this Twitter is awful. We need a new social media." It's like, actually, no. Social media is the problem, not the platform itself. But I've noticed a lot of the really shrill people are just gone. I checked in on some of the accounts of people who are constantly. Rhyd Wildermuth is a fascist, Satanist, whatever. They haven't posted in years. Like, they're on Mastodon or whatever else is there, where everybody can have an even better echo chamber for their own flavor of whatever. Yeah, that's
so.
Fine,
yeah, it's possible to kind of almost get a conversation out, as opposed to before, where you write one sentence.
It's just not. It was
problematic.
People waiting to. It was the definition, to use a Trumpism. Like, it was the definition of a witch hunt. It was like, okay, we burned that one, but the crops still aren't going great. Who falls out of line next? And it's more like, now, if you try that, people pile on you, and I think that's why these awful people have gone, well, allegedly Mastodon. I don't know why you would name, it's perfect, a social platform after an extinct animal, because it is about as filled with life as that. But they could be one of the 800 people left on Threads. Like, it's wonderful. right?
The first time I even looked at Mastodon, like I saw something like you have to do content warnings for food posts, and I'm like, no,
goodbye.
Sorry, no.
Yeah, but I'm happy for them if they're happy there, which I know they aren't. But anyway, we've used a couple of terms that I want to define, but the first one is actually in the title. Why monsters? What are we talking about?
Yes. So there is the etymology of monster comes from the same word that is to demonstrate or to show, like montre, like in French, like show something. The idea of the monster is that it is and warning is not even the correct word for it, but it's something that shows you something. Whenever there was a moment of imbalance, you look especially at the Greek myth, but also in Rome, whenever something was wrong, then the monsters show up. And the monsters show up not to punish humanity, but usually to say, hey, you created this. Something that you did gave a rise to this monster. And it's not even necessarily something that needs to be destroyed. But it's also playing around with Antonio Gramsci, like the famous quote that is way overquoted, and I almost felt bad kind of using it, but the old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born. Here in the interregnum, a variety of monsters appear. The original Italian that he wrote was it means morbid symptoms. But it's the same concept as a monster. A monster is something that shows you something. It's a symptom of a problem. So I use the monsters. I use 4 monsters to hang, the larger narrative of how the left has shifted from a much more broad-based material understanding of human conditions to this ideological. Ever smaller ideological clique, and how we actually got there. Not blaming anybody, not saying, oh, because these idiots read Tumblr. I mean, that's no good anyway. And some of the other attempts to deal with woke ideology or cancel culture or whatever, those tend to be just as shrill as the people that they're trying to combat. My point was, no, let's actually look historically how these conditions arose, why these monsters have appeared, and then what these monsters want to show us, what they want to teach us.
I like that. In the chat, monster is an omen, and it's close to that, right? It's like a unexpected but necessary confrontation with consequences. So to be monstrous is to show to yourself or to a village the consequences. So, and that's like perfect when you think of Frankenstein's monster or something. Like it is a revelation of something that you're either avoiding that is necessary to see, or something that needs to be seen as part of engaging with those consequences, which is really, it's powerful, right? And especially the Hubie monsters calls to mind maps, calls to mind like the fearfulness that keeps one contained in the awful familiar, because at the edges of the awful familiar are these monsters, which are things that must be looked at, right? To move out of it. So it works well, put it that way. I think when people sit with the potency of the metaphor, the whole book, which is what's great in, when titles can do this, it's a hats off moment, but it contains exactly the medicine, I would say, of your exploration.
Thank you. Yeah, and we could talk about this later, but the werewolf especially, I think,
I have a question here. Describe gay werewolves to me. Be as explicit as necessary.
I've written a book that's a gay erotic fantasy, right?
Why are we doing this as the live stream?
Why? I know, actually, and why I have not sent you a copy of it. I'll send you a copy of it. I'll make sure you get it. It's a serialized one. I just haven't written the other ones, but I just need more real life experience to kind of give my imagination some help.
No, but tell us about gay werewolves, because actually this is we'll get halfway to the next thing I need you to define, to be honest.
Well, yeah. So throughout Europe, there's always our idea of what European society was after Rome fell and even before Rome's fall. Has always been either this idea of like the Dark Ages where everyone's like kind of hiding in muddy huts, or Christendom being kind of this outpost with everything else, just waiting for the moment of progress to come. And the way that we look at, or the way we're told that society worked back then, is written from our modern narrative. It's very similar to the way of like attempting to describe animism that you talk about in Ani.Mystic, where we're trying to describe something with a word that doesn't even exist for these people, and so we have to say something like, or what have you. But one thing that hit me, and it was something that I had read in Silvia Federici's Caliban and the Witch, that it was just crazy, was that in Italy in the 1500s, in I can't remember which city, if it was Milan or Venice, the female prostitutes started dressing like men because most of their clients wanted male sex, not female sex. So they thought, hey, well, we'll dress like men, which is completely the opposite of what we think of happening, in the past, where it was men dressing as women to try to get straight male clients that were, this idea that the current way of looking at sexuality and orientation or whatever can be transposed on the past doesn't actually work when you look at the historical incidences. And so for the gay werewolf itself, though, so I mentioned something that it was at Peter and Alkistis's place back when they were in Shropshire, that I think Peter had pulled the book off the shelf and he's like, oh, this might interest you. And it was the grimoire of, or not the grimoire of Pope. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was the addendum to the grimoire of Pope Honorius, where it's all of these Norman shepherd magical rituals. And there's one where a shepherd is trying to get rid of basically body lice because the farrier, the man who was shoeing his horses, fucked him. It's like, well, wait, oh. You had sex with wow, that's kind of fun. What's going on here? And then you see there are some other descriptions or leads on this. Not E.P. Thompson, the other one, Hobsbawm, Eric Hobsbawm, when he wrote his book about wandering men and all of that, bandits, I believe the book was called. You had all of these societies outside of the town or village that were, feared to some degree, because sometimes they were actually bandits. But in other times, it was just people living outside of the villages doing their own thing. And very often, they were pretty, what we would call gay. There was a lot of homosexual, whatever sex. I know we're not allowed to call ourselves homosexual anymore. You know that, right?
Yeah, and we're not really allowed to be gay either. We're supposed to say queer. I'm too old for that. I learned queer at university, and it's like Quentin Crisp and all the rest of it. So anyway, carry on.
But yeah, so when you look at those societies that have actually always existed at the edge of empires, very often there was, many times they were considered as werewolves. Giorgio Agamben brings up this in his book Homo Sacer, about how people outside of the polis, outside of the civitas, were given over to the wolves. They were outlaws. They were, you could do anything to them, because they were given to the gods. They were outside of the law. But then the city itself, this idea of the civilization, the order, has always tried to define everything that it cannot accommodate, cannot integrate, as evil or as a monster or as monstrous. And very often they use natural language with that, like those people are part wolves. I'm losing the thread because now I'm just thinking about gay werewolves in general, and that was your question.
Yeah. Well, werewolf literally means gay man. If you like, no, wolfman rather. If you look at the etymology of it, and I in the book you write about the archetypal significance of a wolf or wolves is calamity, like unexpected calamity that can bring towns or families down, right? When Europe still had wolves, and in the like one of the quotations historically is like he fucked me like because he's a werewolf, and there's like a Brokeback Mountain subtext to that where he's basically calling this person a man who has destroyed his life. Like there's a heart that broke in this weird grimoire subtext, which
absolutely,
really beautiful and poignant. That to call someone a werewolf is to say you are a wolf man. You are calamity brought into my life, and haven't we all dated at least one werewolf?
Well, and then there's the thing too. So he's trying to get rid of mange, but technically scabies. He's trying to get rid of scabies. So he's not saying this was an evil person, but oh man, he gave me something.
He brought,
you know, like there's something really sweet. It's like, oh, you know, I really liked him, but then now I'm scratching myself all of the time.
Have you read a book called Sodomy and the Pirate Tradition?
I maybe it's the same book that I read years ago. Rum, Sodomy, and the Lash.
No, it's called Sodomy and the Pirate Tradition. It's probably boiling in the same vineyard. I heard about that one from Stephen Fry of all people, but it's everything you basically said about homocentric, I suppose, societies on the fridge of acceptability. It appears that one of the appeals of piracy and even the Navy, which is kind of obvious, is that same opportunity to express same-sex attraction or whatever we're supposed to call it in a way. But like piracy in particular, it's like it's baked into this this high seas anarcho-libertarianism that underpins it. Anyway, it's a good little book on no werewolves in it, but it's basically saying the same thing. It's kind of interesting. So you've said capitalism a few times, and we've also said fascism in the sense of you being called a fascist.
Well, you're called one too, so it's okay.
That's true, exactly. In good company. Fascist werewolves unite. And this is a leading question, but I want to go so because I think it's important. When capitalism is a very difficult thing to define, and typically when people use the word a lot, I know what they mean. They typically mean it to describe the things they don't like about the system they're living in. And that's actually a serviceable definition, to be perfectly honest, if you are looking to position yourself in a way to minimize its impact on your life. And that can be things like wage slavery, the lack of nutrition that's available in food in the Western diet, all these kind of things that get lumped under it. It's not that bad a definition as far as these things go, because whenever I hear a left definition of it, I try to find like a Chicago school or Friedman-esque definition of it. And I have like Deirdre McCloskey's one where capitalism isn't really a thing as much as it's the accumulation of stuff that confers status. And as such, it's very old. And I like how slippery it is, to be honest. Not because I'm pro-capitalist, but because I like to, I guess, pirate the edges of the definition. And the trouble, not trouble so much, but I think I like the Benjamin definition of fascism that you have in the book. But for me, it's a little bit circular because it relies on capitalism, which needs a sort of definition. So what's your definition of it? And almost like, has it changed, or have you found more nuance as a result of going through this book? Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I feel less nuance now. The more I looked at it, the very simplest way of describing it, and it's how I've described it in other books as well. It's a social relationship where the vast majority of people have absolutely no access to their survival without selling their labor to a minority who owns the means of survival. So it starts with a material relationship, and all of the social classes or whatever that come after that are secondary to that primary relationship. So if you do not have land, you can't grow your own food. And then you look around and you say, okay, who has the land, and why does the vast majority of people in this place not have their land? Oh, it's because most of it is owned by a couple of people. And you look at the same thing with wealth, like, with the factories, with raw material, etc. That at itself is the definition of capitalism. You could get more complicated with that, but the way that capitalism...
I want to interrupt there with what I would hear someone like Deirdre McCloskey or even Jordan Peterson say, which is, they don't have access to the means of providing for themselves, which is to say land to grow food, for instance. But it doesn't matter to your definition of capitalism that over the last 120 years, they've gotten dramatically richer themselves. Do you know what I mean? Because that's the bit where Deirdre McCloskey will come up with like accumulation. If you look at how we live today versus Louis XIV, even just above the breadline, there's access to a something that has grown over the last century or so. This is the bit that, not that I like, I'm very interested in the parts that get left out of either side taking a position on capitalism. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. So one thing, I would say, like, for example, with the Jordan Peterson argument, and what you tend to see very often is that there is an attempt to historicize capitalism much earlier in history than it actually occurred. There was, Marx's grand explanation, which I think is a pretty good one, which even most capitalists will tend to acknowledge this as well, was that there was a specific change starting in England in the 1600s where lands became not just something you could buy and sell, but a specific market of land that started escalating, which started pushing people off of the lands that they had access to, even if they did not own it. So you have capitalism, and just before that, you have feudalism, at least in Europe, where you could have been a serf with absolutely nothing that you own yourself, like you don't own any land, but you had a cultural and economic and a political right to use the land. Like you could grow food on the Lord's land, even though he was technically the owner, but you could do that. What shifted in capitalism was like, no, you can't do that. Like you need to rent it from there, that humans have no rights to that most basic level of existence, which, of course, if you're in a city right now, most people might be like, yeah, but no one wants to grow their own food, but you grow your own food. I grow my own food, not as much as you, I'm sure. We both know how profoundly powerful that is and how it takes you out much more from the pressure of coercion. Like if you lose everything, but if you still have the ability to grow some food, you're going to survive. If you don't even have the ability to grow some food, you're fucked. So you will do whatever it is that is made available to you, sell your time in any other way, sell your body in any other way, in order to just have that minimum ability to survive.
So it's for you, it's a description of definitely a malfunction in the human relationship to land in particular. It's a very interesting thing, right?
Well, that would be, Silvia Federici is really good at having, made that point, like redirecting Marxism back to land again, and the relationship to the body as well. That, look, it comes down to land because land is the very ground of our being. That is how we live. And that is how
Well,
capitalism
that's what
started.
it becomes metaphysical there, right? Because like that idea comes from the physiocrats, which were French, right? And France has very good growing land, but not as much in the way of minerals. So it's very interested in the association of abundance and agriculture. But Friedman would say, as opposed to that, Japan is mostly garbage land. Like from a growing perspective, it's pretty, but it's mostly garbage because it's just mountains and rock, right? It has no energy to speak of. It has not really good growing. And it was the economic miracle after being bombed at the end of World War II. And so if you look at how that's the bit that gets, when I think of the Friedman style economic view of it, it's like land actually isn't all of it. But it is, I think, contained underneath what you said. There is there's a philosophical paganism that I am obviously more in alignment with, but I'm really interested. It's such a, when you're in something, you can't capture all of it, right? Like you actually can't. Of course. And that's why I'm so interested in that idea that we have if you consider the quality of life and and any of the metrics that like a Jordan Peterson would use for Japan, how they live now versus when they were closer to the land, it's not this, you know what I mean? It's super interesting to me, right? Where these things get lost. But that, it tracks then to what your definition necessarily flows into the Benjamin definition of fascism, which I do actually happen to like, because that's that other great term that people bandy about and explicitly for things they don't like, oh, that's fascist. I'm like, okay. And so give us the definition. I'd say it's so defined, the word definition, by definition.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk about, you know, and I guess first I should make sure everybody knows who Walter Benjamin was. So Walter Benjamin was a Jewish German, you can kind of call him mystic as well. He was a half philosopher, half historian. One of his greatest works is on the concept of history, also sometimes called the thesis on the concept of history or what have you. And he fled Germany with several other people. He hid in France for a while, and then he eventually was able to get transportation out through Portugal. So he crossed over the Pyrenees. When he arrived in Portbou in Catalonia, I'm sorry. That very day, he found out that the Spanish had said that had made an agreement with the Germans that any Jews without any papers needed to be deported back to France. So he either killed himself or was killed by the Gestapo or by the Nazis. And no one, or I'm sorry, not by the Gestapo or by Stalinists. And no one really knows what happened to him. But so he wrote. His definition of fascism actually comes from an essay called Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, or in the age of its mechanical reproduction, depending on how you want to translate it. And what he's really doing is talking about aesthetics, but he's talking about how politics has become only aesthetics, or had become only aesthetics by that time. You know, and we're far into this period that he was talking about. And he uses the fact that you know, art at this point, you know, photography, film, whatever, can be reproduced in factories. That there's never any one-to-one relationship between the artist and the artist any longer, because you can go watch what an artist did in a theater. And his explanation of fascism, which I think is the only one I've been able to find that is even slightly, I mean, for me, it is the clearest, and it also is the only one that does not allow for anyone else to use it how they like, which is what happens with all of the other ones. I mean, Jason Stanley, I think, who's just this obnoxious liberal philosopher or whatever, like his definition of fascism is basically like he started from what he doesn't like about people who like Trump, and just wrote a really long explanation of what fascism is based on them. You know, and you see a lot of that. Even you know, the few anti-fascist scholars or whatever you want to call it, like you look at their definitions, it's like you're basically just defining people you don't like. Yeah. Walter Benjamin's explanation is this: that within capitalism, so capitalism produces masses. That process is through alienation. Alienation, huge concept, but I think also you kind of address alienation in this kind of underhanded way, or not underhanded, but you know, non-direct or much more poetic way throughout Ani.Mystic as well. Alienation, you know, is the process where you no longer see, you know, see things as something that can be related to you. You lose connection to things. You get alienated from land. You get alienated from yourself. You get alienated from all of the creatures around you. You see everything as being separate and unreachable. Within alienation, or within capitalism, alienation is first of all alienation from the land, where you don't look at the land as something that composes you any longer. You look at it as something that you work, and that's it. It's a product. It's an object. The same thing with bodies. We no longer see ourselves as bodies. We see ourselves as having bodies that are this external machine that we need to keep in optimum condition so that we can go to the factories. So the process of creating masses comes from that alienation. Basically, we get ripped out from any other connections that we had that one might call natural, or at least organic cultural connections, being part of a village, being part of a family, being part of a people, being part of, you know, whatever that is. And, you know, especially throwing people into the cities, they end up having no other identity except for what is on sale or what is offered to them. And that's how masses are created. A good example of a mass now, you know, would actually be the social justice kind of thing, where everybody sees like all Black people are part of one group, even though, you know, then they have to get rid of all of the Black people within that group who do not agree with the group. So the creation of a mass is this faceless thing that is ruled by an egregore or an idea. Capitalism creates masses. And those masses, the people who say, hey, actually, this is not working for me. I'd actually like to be able to pay rent, or maybe not have to sell 12 hours of my time every day in order to eat. What he calls a change in property relations. Like they have a right to demand that, is what Walter Benjamin says. And Walter Benjamin says, well, yeah, and fascism offers them instead the expression of that desire without any change whatsoever in the actual property conditions. You get to express yourself. You get to express yourself as a mass, as you saw as was seen in Germany. You know, the creation of the Aryan identity. That's a mass aesthetic, which was a terrifying one. But you know, you get to belong to this big horde, this mass, this mob. And then you get to feel like you're going to change things, but you don't. Instead, you just get the aesthetic of change. And that aesthetic is really terrifying. What happens with that aesthetic was the concentration camp, you know? Yeah. And I bring up, and I use Walter Benjamin's definition specifically because that is what identitarianism is. Identitarianism in any form. Which we're used to just talking about it in its right-wing nationalist form. But, you know, social justice identitarianism is a thing too, where you subsume your identity into a larger group, and then you try to express your desire for change, but actually don't get to change anything. Exactly. You know, that is the same mechanism that fascism offered before, and that's all that's being on offer right now through the neoliberal identity project. Yeah.
See, I love it, right? Because it is an estrangement into a horde whose power you then borrow to synthetically replace the feeling of connection, right? And this is the fucking annoying thing about anti-fascist definitions of fascism relying on Trump, because like that's true. It's just not, you just don't get to it the way they do, because everything you just like to weaponize into a mass the dissatisfaction as a result of the failures of the American capitalist project, and to allow them to borrow the energy of that swamp draining mugger revenge. Like that is a Benjamin definition of fascism. It's not that they're wrong about that. It's just that they decided fascism is things they don't like. And that's dumb, right? Because they've actually missed something quite dangerous, which is the mugger stuff. It is a definition of fascism, as is the purple-haired blob people on TikTok. That's it's the same. Like, well, they're different masses, but it's the same result of estrangement into a mass.
It's the same expression. It's the same. It's the same offer. You don't get to do anything else except express yourself. What is TikTok? You know, everything that lives of TikTok is always making fun of on there. Like what they're really just doing is making fun of people expressing a desire that will absolutely never be fulfilled. Just like the people who support libs of TikTok, you know, they're doing the exact same thing. Like the people who want to return to a traditional Christian society, like this. Again, this is the expression. This is all they get to hope for, and you have masses fighting each other on whose expression, whose aesthetic gets to win out, and then who will suffer, or you know what group will suffer when that coalesce that mob is finally coalesced. But nothing changes, and if anybody watching or listening has any doubt, like if you look at what happened in Germany, what happened was the capitalists very quickly said, okay, well, these fascists are actually going to protect capitalism. That sounds wrong. If you're an American, it sounds like, you know, you think capitalism and fascism are completely opposite things, but actually you're thinking democracy and fascism, and the problem of thinking that democracy and capitalism are the same thing, that's an American thing. But what happened was, instead of, and as I point out, Germany was facing a massive underclass revolt, and the capitalists were fucking terrified. And the communists were actually doing quite well in Germany. However, when the capitalists then decided with the uprising fascist party, they were able to divert all of that anger of the lower classes towards a scapegoat, which was the Jews. And this benefited the capitalists as well, because the small section of the capitalist class, and again, small, that was Jewish, all of their stuff was seized. All of their wealth was seized. The capitalists got to engage in primitive accumulation of that class, you know, while the lower classes are going for them and also going for another section of the lower class as well, the lower class part of the Jewish population. And capitalism was saved.
Yeah. It's I like that important distinction between conflating democracy, which obviously in that Churchillian sense is it's not perfect, but it's better than a lot of the other stuff we've tried. Conflating democracy and capitalism, because it's the American dream, I suppose, means that you'll miss that. You'll actually miss that the conditions, because having asked you for a definition of capitalism and it having eluded me, I'm never satisfied with the one that I'm running with. I actually quite like the idea that a definition of capitalism could be the formation of masses via the process of estrangement. Like, if I look at where it is a continuity and where it is a break within particular European history, it is that process, right? Because that at least allows for the, let's call it the Peterson critique, where it's like, yes, all well and good, but over the 20th century, the working class's quality of life and total wealth did in fact grow, even if the top 1% grew X million % more, or so on. You still have the formation or the estrangement into mass effect that is associated over it. So I'm interested, and consequently, you can see fascism as a hopefully final defense of capitalism. It's
the immune response. It's the immune response of capitalism. When the system itself starts, the Marxist idea is that capitalism is constantly trying to outrun its contradictions, the same way that Taliesin was constantly trying to outrun Caradwin's shape changes. And at some point it cannot outrun the contradictions. But the way of preventing that moment of disillusion or negredo, like its destruction and its rebirth as something else, is fascism. At the moment where all of the illusions of democracy are falling apart, then you have this immune response. It's like, okay, well, let's do this state of emergency, as it were, which, I bring up states of emergency a lot in the werewolf section, and then also afterwards, because that's, what happened with the pandemic in the last few years is a continuation of what we saw during the war on terror, where, hey, we have to suspend all of the regular ways that things are going. What happened right before the world of terror, the war on terror? Right before that was the massive anti-globalization movement. And then suddenly you have this like, okay, time to have an emergency now, where we suspend everything, we accumulate more power that we promise we'll give back. We don't really want it. Of course, they always hold on to it. That emergency, which is something that Walter Benjamin had actually brought up as well, that there's always an emergency that will stop that contradiction from finally, coming to the head. And that's those are the states of emergency that we see more and more and more frequently now.
Yeah. Very good. So that leads us, speaking of defenses of capitalism, and it's a reboot of the cancellation question, asking for a definition and whether you think it's changed at the beginning and the end of this project. It's funny to call a book coming out the end of a project, right? Having written a few of them myself. It's not the right word, isn't it? What you've actually done, or what you hope to do with the book, is to like table some stuff to say, hey, let's thrash this out. I've sweated blood into this fucking thing, which I would be much appreciated if you looked at, and if you resonate with, let's thrash it out, right? So it's funny to describe it as a beginning and end of a process.
It's like at the end of the pregnancy is a better way of putting it, perhaps.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, okay, so you're all done now. The pregnancy is over, right?
Yeah. The baby's not.
Yeah, but I also have this child now.
Yeah. So yeah, I understand completely. But I mean, with the book like this and teeing up at the end of the discussion of the, let's say, defenses of capitalism, definition of woke, beginning of project, say end of project or current state of project, and whether, like the process of cancellation, that's changed somewhat. Because I sense that it has. I'm going to leave it there and see what you think.
Yeah, so you probably noticed I avoid the word woke, except in quotation marks, throughout the entire book. Because just like fascism, it means whatever you want it to mean, depending on the context. And as soon as the word is said,
a few years ago, it used to be good. It used to be a good thing, right?
It was, and this is something that people have forgotten about. Like I remember when being woke was what we were. We were woke, and it wasn't the right wing telling us that we were woke. We were telling each other we're woke. We're like enlightened.
It's like an update of a 60s, 70s idea of hip. It was like I am
precisely.
Like, I'm on the right current of history.
Yeah. So I use instead the phrase social justice identitarianism. You could also just say social justice ideology or social, intersectional social justice or whatever you want to call it. But what it is primarily, well, and it's only a cultural and social ideology. There's no material politics in it. And to cite this or to explain this, we can look very easily at the fact that, actually, again, Adolf Reed and Walter Ben Michaels have both brought this up, that you're supposed to be, or every group, like if you're a black person and you're part of all black people, and you are being oppressed by the white people, And every other group is the same way, where you have this unified mass. But of course, in every single one of these racial groups, and also when you look at, any other of these categories as well, you have the same gap in wealth that you have in the supposedly oppressor white class. So that you have, the 10% of the richest Black people hoard roughly the same percentage as the 10% of the wealthiest white people for that category. Like, what is happening is the gap between the races themselves is not significant. What is happening is within the races, every single racial group, every single identity group is experiencing the same thing, a concentration of wealth with a small group of people, whereas the rest of the people are left to scramble around, like to try to eat. But within social justice identitarianism, you can't look at that. You cannot look at the material reality of those situations. Instead, all you can do is look at the social relationships to say, hey, in these places, white people are more privileged than Black people. In these places, males have more privilege than females, et cetera. What it is, I feel like it is it's a quasi-religious ideology. And this is not a strange thing to think about, because Marx himself thought that theology was basically the highest or most refined form of ideology. We haven't really gone away from theology anymore, although even if we don't believe in gods, it's the same religious process. It's the same thing where, we're trying to find our meaning by these categories, which is not much different than trying to find your meaning as being part of one grand Catholic communion, and then also to see yourself as opposed to the evil pagans or the evil heathens that are just outside of the towns. We have the same process happening. So I avoid the word woke, but I think social justice identitarianism is a much better way and a very descriptive way of putting it, even though I know that the people who generally support those ideas would bristle quite heavily at the idea that they're identitarian. But, as I mentioned in the book, like what else do you call a politics that bases itself around identity except for identitarianism? And the other part of your question too is you asked if something was changing. Is that correct?
Yeah. Has it changed from when you began the project to where it is now? I fancy it's had a change in status and a belief in the wider culture that this is pernicious and widespread, but probably it might not actually win. And we have the recent fall of Ibram X. Kendi as a good example of in the sense that no one was surprised. Oh, it turns out he's a Ellen DeGeneres style horrible boss, and
no one was surprised. But then there's been a lot of disavowals saying, "Oh, we never actually listened to him anyway. No one actually took him seriously on our side," even though no, that's not true.
Yeah, in the sense, this is what I mean. I think there is. You still have the inveterate identitarians, but this is the thing. Their total numbers is shrinking, but when that happens, the people who remain get more vicious. It's like a cornered animal idea. But I fancy that's what's changed over the last number of years, is people are no longer tiptoeing around Robin DiAngelo positions because they're stupid. Right. But the people that are still in that are worse, right? I saw, and this is unrelated, but not really. I saw I forget who it was, some turf or another, like on a YouTube short, saying that the people that have, the parents that have transitioned their children, not approved of their adult children's adult choices, are never going to back down from that position because they'll have to sit with the horror of what they did. Now that's a real tough, I don't think kids should be anywhere near that nonsense until they're adults. But the point is, it is how you create unkillable shock troops for an ideology. It's something like that. And I think that's where, if we want to call it identitarianism or whatever, has changed. The it's become apparent to the wider discourse that, including them, that it's not going to win. And that actually makes the people who remain in it, although fewer, more vicious. Thoughts?
Well, I love that optimism. I don't know, because I think it's following very closely around the way. So another fun thing about capitalism, right? Eventually, capitalism fills up or manifests a market that it's trying to get, and then it capitalizes on that entire market, and then it kind of creates a monopoly, and it's no longer able to grow. It needs to grow in order to keep going, because eventually, the smaller amount of capitalists you have, it's not going to work. So they have to find new markets, and oftentimes, what that meant in the 16, 17, 1800s was, let's go bomb this African country or the South American country or whatever, and then let's bring them capitalism or democracy or Christianity or whatever whatever words they use, but let's create a new market here. Now we have a new set of producers. Now we have a new set of resources. Now we have a new set of consumers. So it constantly had to spread, and of course capitalism has hit this point where what it needs to do. Gentrification is the greatest example of this. When a neighborhood is gentrified, what's happening is the capitalists are no longer able to make any more money on the buildings, on the businesses that are there. So what they do is they go through, they destroy everything and rebuild it and create new markets. Just the same way that many of us now are kind of stuck in this the Internet of Things, or so many people driving for Uber or whatever. Like this is a new market that the capitalists are trying to or need to create in order to keep the sustained growth, because if at any point it stops growing, it starts dying. And I think the social justice identitarianism is very much similar, or is using the same sort of process. You could look at it as a bacteria in a body that's trying to kill it. Eventually, if it cannot spread to another body, then the bacteria is done, or the virus is done. It needs to spread. And so if you look at what's happened, in the first, let's say 8-10 years of this, you've primarily seen it only in the English-speaking world, but then you're slowly starting to see it attempt to take hold in other places. And actually, there's a very good critique of this from John Gray, who is a really brilliant man, and he's no Marxist and he's no leftist at all. Who pointed out that he sees social justice identitarianism, and he uses the word wokery or woke. He sees this as the new version of neoconservatism, is conservatism.
Absolutely.
The new, and that it's needing to spread. And I mean, so in a couple of weeks, I just saw an advertisement for this. So I live in Luxembourg, which is one of the most corrupt capitalist places ever, right? And this has not really come to Luxembourg yet. You don't hear anybody talking about pronouns here. You just don't. There's one radical group that's made up of rich, spoiled kids, all of them white, talking about how racist everybody is, and that's it. You don't see much more. But where it is coming through is the corporations. So that one of the largest banks here, one of the largest banks in Europe, is hosting a seminar for CEOs and other corporate managers to help them learn how to use pronouns correctly in order to, so it has to spread. But what's happening, you see in France, it didn't really spread on the lower classes, but actually these ideas were never lower class. These were never working class ideologies. These were all, originating from the professional managerial class. So they're going for that upper class here, that same class within Luxembourg, hoping to get them to adopt these ideas. And once they adopt those ideas and they kind of lead, then the rest of the people will follow. So that is, that's the same sort of colonialism that you see in all of these other ideologies that came from America, and, Anglo-American ideas as well. It's the same way Christianity spread. The missionaries didn't go convert the unwashed masses. They converted the princes. As soon as they converted the princes, then the prince forced everybody to convert. And I think that's what's happening now. Will they succeed? I don't know. I would like to say no. I think the only thing that would prevent them from succeeding would be a left that finally stood up for itself.
See, I think
that's the big question.
No. I think it's we're talking about reactionary thought prior to going live on this. If I look at the figureheads of this, the political figureheads of this movement around the world, it is Justin Trudeau, it is Jacinda Ardern, and to some extent it's the potato in chief, Biden, right? And they are the least, so Jacinda Ardern decided she was too tired to fight the next election and is now paid by Harvard as a visiting professor. The reason she left is because she was profoundly unpopular, and her replacement, who is her 2IC, is about to drastically lose the election in a way that Labour hasn't lost in New Zealand in a very long time. Justin Trudeau is the least popular prime minister in the history of the country. And if you look at the center-right polling in the United States, Biden's approval is somewhere in between 9 and 13%. Now, what swamps them is not a left that gets its act together. We may hope it's a Jordan Peterson center-rightism, which is to say, I can tolerate that, but I'm not sure it will be. And so I think it's, so this is the difference. It's not, that may have been how Christianity spread, but Christianity came with a medicine that allowed it, and a lasting medicine that allowed it to stick around. And that was a fundamental change in the position of a being in the cosmos. This, I think, is ending because it's awful, but I think because it won't admit it, and it cannot update itself, almost like a cancer, like because it can't update itself about its errors, that it actually has to be swamped by its opposite. And so I don't think it's a left that gets its act together that destroys it. I think it's, dare I say, something less palatable, and that's
and
more medium.
I mean, very wise people have been telling me the same thing, including a mutual friend of ours. Like, you know, is that the left is dead. You know, look at this book reading as awake. You know, celebrate it as awake because the left is dead. If the left is to survive at all, you know, which maybe it needs to completely die and then reform itself. You know, so if you look at the reaction to Trump, and I was, when I was in London, actually, I had to take a taxi back from Hoxton at the end of the night. And my driver was from Pakistan. And he found out I was an American, and then I read about politics. And the first thing he wanted to say is like, can you guys please vote for Trump again? You know, and there's no American who would ever be able to understand this. But I have heard this argument so many times before. I've heard this, like in France, I heard this all of the time from immigrants. Where it's like, yeah, you know what? Trump was the only one who left the rest of the world alone to actually let us exist. You know, but of course, the reaction within the United States to Trump the first time was everybody wants to genocide me for whatever reason. Everybody who is not me, who does not look like me, who does not use the exact identity, ideology, whatever, they want to genocide me. And of course, you're going to see that much more. And that actually would kill what's left of the left, if there is even anything. You know, and actually, I sometimes wonder, and someone asked me, like, so who are you actually writing this for? I mean, you're writing this for the left, but do you think the left is going to listen? And I'm like, actually, I think I'm writing it for all of those people who actually never moved. You know, just the people who found out that the territory, the map was redrawn, and suddenly they were in the territory of monsters. They were the evil people, even though they had just been there. And, you know, maybe this doesn't change for 10 years. Maybe this never changes. Maybe, you know, my book, like, you know, does nothing. But I'm trying to write this for those who, you know, in the same position that, you know, say, hey, hold on, you're not crazy. You know, yes, the stuff went wild, and worse is going to come probably. But again, like Ursula K. Le Guin said, we'll need people who remember what freedom was like.
Correct. See, this is because, funnily enough, I was going to end on that, which is who is it for? In the same way, like, why did you write the book? And I think you're onto something there. In the we had a live call on tyranny for the premium members earlier this week at the time of recording. And one of the things that I like about anarchism still, even though I think it is the last European political philosophy, I think you Goldilocks through them if you are my way of thinking, and you get to anarchism and go, this is the best of them, but it's still not enough, right? And then you make the jump into whatever the fuck, chaos magic animism, I don't know. But you make the jump into a living cosmos and Charles Eisenstein's more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Now, anarchism has a intellectual lineage, because what we were talking about was, what do you do with anarchism if you no longer need to smash the state because it's ending? Which it is. Like the model that I'm operating in, this is the end of these next few years is the end of this project as we would understand it. So you actually don't need to bring it down because it's coming down. So it's like, well, on the one hand, that's a relief. It raises a whole bunch of other challenges and opportunities. But with an intellectual anarchism, you can invalidate the state in your heart, in your field. You can actually turn it into the bully and the thief that it is. And that means it can still take your money and imprison you and kill you, but it's doing it at the level of the thief, right? Like, so you transmute. So the survival or not of the left, I think the whole model that is going away from an astrological and everything else perspective as we move into have moved into this neutraplicity includes the left-right divide, but the positionality that you're talking about persists, right? Like it persists in a different form, and it must kind of, funny enough, coming back to the Agamben quotation, it must necessarily be monstrous in the interregnum. And I think that's my sense of who you are.
So to clarify, that was Gramsci who said that. But so about anarchism. So there's an entire chapter where I pretty much excoriate anarchism because I started out as an anarchist. I didn't end there. I went to Marxism after that, and of course I was taught like by everybody, oh no, Marx is evil or whatever. But the core power, and I guess we could call it the core magic as well, of both Marxism and anarchism was agency. When communists went into the slums and the factories, what they were doing is telling people, hey, you're the one who's doing the work. You should be able to actually benefit from the work you're doing. The core, what anarchists were doing was saying, hey, you don't need anyone to tell you what to do in order to have a fulfilled life. Now, you don't hear Marxists saying that any longer, and you definitely do not hear anarchists saying that any longer. Like American anarchism, no, it's everybody else's fault that you are suffering, which is the opposite of agency. And in the chapter on the vampire, I bring that up as that's the core raisonnement of all of these politics, is that I am suffering because of someone else. There is no, I cannot be happy until this person pays for what they're doing to me, even though they've never met me and, help. I cannot act. And both anarchism and Marxism, that was their core power, was to say, hey, actually, you can actually control your life. You can affect things. Even though they tell you you cannot, you can. What comes after these things has to be the same thing. It has to be this sense that, yes, you can do something. You can control, not control. Control's not the right word, but you are an agent, and you are a co-creator. You're not a consumer. Things are not just done to you. You also do, and you do with other things, and you can make relationships. You can make agreements with, other humans and other non-humans or more than humans, That, I think, if the left is to die and transform itself, it needs to be reborn just in that idea.
Yeah. So I think that's further along in anarchism than it is in Marxism, at least from some of the stuff I read online, like Paul Kudenek and the people who grew from the green anarchism, which definitely had its problems, to being inspired by Taoism and the rest of it. And I would even put Charles Eisenstein in that category because he absolutely is inspired by Taoism.
Right, but of course, that no American anarchist would actually allow either
Of course,
Paul
of course.
nor
Well, no
Einstein's
left
to even be
American anarchist,
considered
right?
one.
Because,
So
yeah,
yeah.
because you have that whole world. You have the dangerous right anarchists like Tom Woods and Michael Malice and so on that probably would in their own anarcho-libertarian way. But yes, the anarcho-Bidenism, which was definitely a term I heard during the election, which I'm like, that's it, lights out. No more of this for you, America, until you can behave correctly with these tools. Yes, I agree completely. But I think one of the things that as we move through this triplicity change, this Pachacuti, this apocalypse, this moment, the words will fail. The words we currently use and the boundaries we currently use belong to the outgoing world. So this is why I think to situate yourself in the container, the archetypal container of the monstrous, is tactical, and like it's medicinal, but it's tactical because it doesn't require you to have further steps, further plans. Because as Bayo Akomolafe says, that's how capitalism dreams. That's literally this ongoing machine-like planism. And what is called for instead is this lycanthropy, is this transmutation, is a process of becoming monstrous in that original definition. And I think that's really powerful. I think that's who you wrote the book for, I think. That's my experience of having read it anyway.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Very good. Very good. Well, the chat's been kind of interesting, but anything else? We've covered a bunch of it. There was all kinds of things I wanted to talk about, the Kinderladen and all this other kind of cool shit. Do you want to do the Kinderladen or anything else we want to talk about in the book?
Yeah, the Kinderladen are so, and I'll just describe them very briefly. During the 60s in West Germany, there was a movement of daycare centers. The word translates as children's shops. And it was based off of the ideas of William Reich and also some of the other members of the Frankfurt School, or more specifically with that. And the idea was this, that fascism started because there was something authoritarian within children that was then allowed to grow into adulthood. And the only way to stop fascism was to help children become more free and more anti-hierarchical. What resulted was a lot of really disturbing sexual experiences from the children, or with the children and with adults. What came out, Spiegel had actually done a report on it. And when I first read it, I was like, no, this is right-wing propaganda.
Right.
This never occurred, you know. And then I had actually read Dagmar Herzog's Sex After Fascism, where she brings it up as well, you know. And there's quite a lot of attestation to this. But of course, my initial idea was like, no, this didn't happen. And then I realized, actually, what's been happening with the left for quite a long time is when something really bad like that happens, or when an activist does something, or you mentioned like the stuff about like TERF and trans or whatever. There's often this statement that no, there are never men who pretend to be women in order to get into women's spaces and to abuse them. Like that never happens, except it does. And what happens is when we say never, or that's untrue, or when we deny it, then you have somebody like Matt Walsh, or somebody else who just points to one example where they have proof, and you make the entire left a liar. And it's like, well, why are we so dishonest about these things? Maybe we should actually look at the way that these things have happened, see how badly we've fucked up, why we have fucked up, which is usually that we've taken these ideologies, usually from academics, and we said, okay, this is how it's going to be now, and we're going to apply this to everyone else. And oftentimes we start with children, and then we don't know why there's this backlash afterwards where parents are like, oh no, I don't want you doing that to my children. Oh well, it must be the parents who are reactionary, that it must be their inner fascism. well, anyway, now let's talk about abolishing the family in order to weaken that. It's just this cycle where it's like, actually, if you had just stepped back and said, oh God, that was awful. That wasn't me. And I'd like to disavow that this thing happened, except I know it happened. So instead I'm going to say, no, we're not going to do that. And we're going to learn from our mistakes, but we don't do that.
Yeah. For years, Connor, the news shows would talk about this, and I described it for years. There reaches a point where something like trans activism goes in reverse and makes, let's say, trans suffrage more difficult rather than easier. And this is that like Ivan Illich idea that a technology works until it doesn't. And cars are the example they used, or transport, where one car or a few hundred cars speeds up transport, but then when everyone has them, it slows transport up. Systems make themselves worse particularly if they can't update, which again, these ideas don't. This is something I learned at university, was like in the 70s, at the beginning of gay rights, like in the modern formulation of it, that's when NAMBLA was about, and they decided to tack themselves to like the gay and lesbian rights. And there are politicians in I think it's, don't quote me exactly on this, but it's someone like Diane Abbott, who, that was at the beginning of her career, was pro-NAMBLA because of this kind of like unthinking leftist process of actually something. Wait a minute, do I mean, it's all well and good for like gays, but wait, do I mean like men having sexual relationships with boys? Am I about that? And not being able to update because it's caught in this ideology. I'm pretty sure it's someone like Diana, but and that's a really good example, right? Because she's not a pedophile, she's not a man in love with a boy. It's almost like, well, what fucking dog do you have in this hunt to start with? And the trans stuff is like that. I hate people, please don't be too upset by this, but like, it's fucking Karens. It's not even trans. The trans people I know are like, this is.
Yeah, well, so that's the thing too. Like the trans people I know are like, yeah, this is not what I was about, and this is not what I'm about, and then like watching trans activists, like watching a communist trans woman get completely destroyed by people online because she's transphobic. Like, it's like, what, how did this happen? But then you see this in every single identity group as well. There's a point where, when the contradictions can't be sustained as perfectly, then you start seeing the purges where, suddenly, I mentioned in the book as well, the concept of multiracial whiteness, where you could be black, but actually be white because you voted for Trump. So that like the categories you have to keep changing the words and changing their meaning in order to keep the primary ideology intact, instead of saying, oh, actually, this is not working. Let me step back and ask, okay, so why did these black people vote for Trump? Why did these Hispanics do, what's going on here? Like, but instead you keep hammering until like something like works, until you build a house, except you can't build a house with just a hammer. So, and we see that all over the place. And some of these things are extremely contentious and get to the point where anybody who even slightly questions it, is immediately accused of being, the worst possible example of the people who are going to genocide you. And when you watch that happen to the people who are part of that identity group themselves, that's when you start seeing that, wait, there's a problem here. And I think other people have been slowly watching this happen, and they've been saying, ooh, okay, something has to change here. So, on that, I'm actually quite optimistic. Here's
but that's kind of, I think that's one of the step changes coming, because we've done it for cancellation and we've done it for whatever woke is. I think one of the step changes is that realization has occurred to a lot of people outside of those core shock troops who are like never going to change, because reality would crumble into like a complete breakdown for them if they separate from it now. Then they're lost, right? The matrix has them, if you will. But I'm broadly optimistic as well. I think but I'm optimistic because this is part of the unraveling of the promises and agreements that run this capitalist, technocratic, whatever you want, system. Like this is it coming undone, and there's nothing. It doesn't get fixed. Like that's just what happens, and it falls to us, I think, to be monstrous. I think that's the move.
And it will be extremely messy, and there will be a lot of really, really horrible rage. And unfortunately, people might get really harmed. And right now, I mean, stoking a reaction, like the more, you mentioned the stuff on pedophilia, like I've seen more than my share of anarchist, radical, like social justice identitarians, like basically arguing, yes, no, children are sexual beings. They should be able to do whatever they want. This is not really harmful. But at the same time, having these weird sexual ethics for adults where a 40-year-old and a 25-year-old, that's an exploitative thing. But for some reason, an 8-year-old and a 20-year-old, that's not. It's like these contradictions happening all of the time. It's like, oh, no, don't stop. Just please stop, step back, and then also realize what you are doing to the rest of us. Like what you are, how you are endangering the people that you supposedly think you are helping. There are trans activists who are absolutely endangering other trans people through their extremism and their need for social capital. And you see this in every other group as well. And if the backlash against entire groups of people because of these very loud extremes that no one is able to do anything with, or everyone is so scared or so exhausted with saying, hey, could you stop? Like the backlash against the entire groups will be absolutely awful, and of course will be then used to prove the point of the absolutely unhinged representatives or self-appointed representatives of each identity group.
Yeah. All right. So what next? What are you doing? I mean, the book's only just come out, but
yeah,
what are you doing now? Is there another book in this series? Is there another, is this the beginning of? Because it's not a magic book. Although, funnily enough, one of the last things I was thinking about is I was waiting and I appreciate Repeater is a different publisher to your usual stuff, but I was waiting for this idea of being a realist of a larger reality to be made explicit to what is presumably a to slightly magical left audience of like how I experience that, which is a cosmos that is composed of living beings, right? So it's there for me to pick up in the subtext, but like for me, that's almost your version, which we got from grandmother, of like Charles Eisenstein's More Beautiful World, right? Like to be a realist of a larger reality, I hear that. I hear I hear step into where you belong, which is communion in a cosmos that is composed of beings, right? Like
the chapter on the zombie is where I'm able to do as much of that as I felt comfortable doing in this book. Because there's there are limits, I think, in a political book on what you can really do before. I mean, I'm already, there's already going to be leftists who are like, oh yeah, you're an awful person before they even read the book. And then to also say, oh yeah, and I mean, I've already seen some of the critiques. There's just like, oh yeah, so this guy's like against identity politics and he's a druid, so obviously he's a fascist. It's like, well,
oh, interesting.
They'll use whatever.
I thought you'd be dismissed because of your silly, naive beliefs, rather than, oh, because you're a druid, you're a fascist. I thought it's like, oh, I'm not going to listen to a religious nutcase. Interesting.
Keep in mind that there's. It might come. Give them some ideas. I doubt they're watching us, but give them some ideas. I need better critics. I need better critics. Like the critics I've had so far are kind of.
Yeah, but you left it in the subtext for the audience that's going to find you from your, let's say, metaphysical or philosophical background, right? / foreground. It's not like you've abandoned it, but it's and I think that's, and Ursula Le Guin was always very good at that, right? Being the best fantasy writer of the 20th century. Realists of a larger reality, she can say that to a mixed audience as well, and it hit everyone the way it's supposed to, which is what you did there. But it does bring up the next question, like, are you going to do the Matt Damon thing of like a money film and an art film? Like, are you doing a pagan book next, or what's left? Not what's left. What calls to you along the repeater line, if you will, next? Does that make sense?
Well, so actually, they've already floated the idea of another book on land, but I was supposed to talk to Carl, the editor, but we got really busy, so I'm going to talk to him in November when I'm there again.
Okay.
You know, so I mean, that's a hey, is this interesting to you? But there's no contract, there's nothing. You know.
But something is in like you're not done with this as a thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, so you know what I want to work on, and I bought all of these books for this earlier this year. Is I want to write more on political theology, you know, with especially on that shift in the 1500s within Europe, where you know, magic went from something that was naturalistic to something that was completely caused by demons, to something that doesn't exist at all, you know, in a very short period of time. And I especially focusing on Jean Baudin and his the demon mania of the witches, and that strange period, which is of course is the same period from which the charm against scabies in you know, with the werewolf section, that comes from as well. Like that I think is very fascinating for me, because you can see the echoes of those unresolved conflicts still come out here. Something I bring up in Here Be Monsters is the fact that with the idea of a you know, a gender identity relies upon a container or a psychological container that is pretty much the same thing as the soul. And of course, psychology comes from the Greek word that meant soul. You know, the sense that you have this idea that there's a felt sense that is the true self that you need to manifest. Of course, that's from the Christian legacy. And you do not see this in the animist cultures, who don't believe that there's a true self, because you have lots of selves, you know, and then those selves are constantly changing. And so I've been really interested in the way that you know, as the Christian consensus, as it were, you know, as Catholicism fell apart, Protestantism, you know, came on there, you see this mass transition, and at the same time, the birth of capitalism. All of this in that same century, and that changes our idea of what a soul is, what magic is, what spirits are. So I'd love to write on that. Cool. I doubt that would be a book for repeater, but that's you know, I have all the books for it. I'm slowly reading it. So
yeah, that's I resonate with that. I have book piles for like, that's that project, that's that project, that's that project. If only AI actually worked and I could allocate Gordons to these projects, but sadly no. All right, well, that's exciting. I think that'll be that's certainly fun to think with, and I'm sure you will find a way, in the funny way of running multiple projects at once, how that will be in relation to ongoing work done. I'm going to call it the repeater line. I'm not suggesting anyone carry on publishing different books, but you know what I mean. Like I don't even want to call it the normie line. I want to say the repeater line, because it's that sort of audience, which I think you do have absolutely something very valuable.
Well, you know, Angie has a book coming out with them in a couple of years.
Oh, I do.
She just officially signed that contract, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, good. Infecting them from the inside. I'm excited. Well, sir, congratulations. Very good book. And I'm glad the launch in London went so well, and all the rest of it. So tell people who are listening and watching and so on, where they can get it, where they can find you and such.
Yeah, so you can find me on Substack at rhyd.substack.com. There's links to my books there. You can just look up Here Be Monsters, Rhyd Wildermuth. You can either buy it directly from Repeater, at their site. It's on Amazon. There's a Penguin Random House aggregator page as well if you're in the United States. Yeah, and also you can get it in bookstores. It is in bookstores as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's always fun. All right. Well, again, great work, and I'm really excited for this to be out in the world and to bring people into inner and hopefully outer discussions in this, and I suppose this important time. So thank you very much, and well done.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an awesome conversation, like always.